great to be with you all today. So I will just ask you to begin with to direct your, put down your cell phone and whatever else you have in your hand and direct your attention to the screen. Okay, so my plan is to take you on a transformative journey from sort of generic nonprofit staff member to a superhero making full use of your superpowers, or if you prefer, your secret weapons. Okay, so I'm sure each of you has multiple superpowers or secret weapons, but today I'm going to focus on just two of them. The first is your ability, and you share this ability with your staff, your board members, your funders. And it's the ability to process visual information at lightning speed. Your other secret weapon is the data your organization collects every day. Data visualization puts these two superpowers into action. It will help you to understand and show what you do and to craft new strategies to improve what you do. So here's the journey, which I've visualized as sort of a graph. We begin by discussing the mostly really rational reasons that many people in nonprofit organizations often don't make good use of data. Then we will consider your two secret weapons. Then we will consider your challenges, in particular fundraising challenges, and how to use the secret weapons to address those challenges. And I'll draw to a close by pointing you to resources that will allow you to hone your secret weapons beyond this workshop. And then we'll open it up to questions, as Sam mentioned. Okay, but before we begin the journey, a little bit about who I am. I love evidence, but I hate spreadsheets. Here I am being buried by spreadsheets. I have more than 25 years of experience studying, funding, and evaluating human services, primarily as a researcher at Chapin Hall, which is a child policy center at the University of Chicago. At Chapin Hall, I worked with a lot of organizations and their data all the time. And I came to know the difficulties that many organizations face in using data well. I felt there's got to be a better way for organizations without high-level data analysis skills in-house to extract meaning quickly and painlessly from their data and to put it to work for them. And that's when I got interested in data visualization. I earned a certificate in data visualization from the University of Washington, in addition to my PhD in social policy, and started doing data visualization work at my research center. But I also started taking on my own clients at that time. And I now work full-time for my own organization, Data Viz for nonprofits. I help nonprofits, consultants, and foundations to visualize their data. All right. Okay, so we are on step number 1, which is why you don't use data or why you don't use it as effectively as you might. In my work with organizations, I've come across 6 primary reasons, and let's talk about each one. Okay, the first reasons you don't make great use of data may be because you have either a data naivete or even a downright aversion. Nonprofit staff tend to have expertise in issues such as the environment, the arts, health, education, but not data analysis. And indeed, some have a downright data aversion. They may admit or even proudly proclaim that they are not numbers people. Okay, so reason number 2 is the time crunch. And this is really the reason we don't get a lot of things done, right? Nonprofit staff just don't have the time for data. They're struggling to stay afloat, to submit the next proposal, maintain programming, of course, addressing the huge and varied needs of their clientele, cultivating new donors, and digging through data really gets put on the back burner. Some understandably worry about what their data will show. So fear is reason number 3. Nonprofit staff may fear that they won't be able to control the story or that data will be taken out of context and you'll be compared to other organizations that aren't really comparable. And they fear that funders will withdraw support based on data, really no matter how much, a funder might talk about continuous quality improvement and such. Number 4 is dirty data. Some nonprofit staff have low-level staff members entering data into management information systems or spreadsheets. Other organizations have multiple staff members entering data, and each person is entering the data slightly differently. And the result can be dirty data, which just means data that is inaccurate because it has not been entered consistently and accurately. So for example, if a participant is entered twice into a database, once as Michael Smith, and then again later on as Michael B. Smith, then tracking this participant's progress is going to be difficult because as far as the data concerned, he's 2 different people. Number 5 is wrong data. Many nonprofits have data on their participants and their financials, but often lack data to show impact. So for example, a tutoring program may not have their participants' school grades or test scores because it's difficult to get that information from school districts. An employment program may not have data on former participants' wages over time because it's just really difficult to collect. Some outcomes are harder to quantify or require surveys of participants. Organizations often lack the time and funds to collect this sort of data. Number 6 is disconnected data. So rather than having a central management information system, smaller nonprofits and nonprofit staff may store their data on separate Excel or Google spreadsheets. So Michael Smith's demographics might be on one sheet and his attendance in various programs on other sheets. And this makes analysis of the relationship of, say, age to program participation really difficult, right? Because you have that data, it's not connected to each other, it's in 2 different sources. Okay, so we've talked about why you don't use data, and guess what one of your secret weapons is? As I mentioned, it's indeed data. Most organizations have lots of data, even really small organizations have lots of data, and it's packed away in databases and spreadsheets, and it's just not going to good use. Data is the way we know what we're doing is worthwhile. You can think of it as sort of a tool, and we don't invest in other tools, say computers, and then store them away in storage rooms and rarely use them. But it often is exactly what we do with data. We invest a lot in collecting it and then don't make great use of it on the other end. As I mentioned, even small organizations collect data on many things. Here's just a sample of the types of data that most nonprofits collect. Of course, participation, data on participation, programs, donations, events, visits, audience, web traffic, and so on. Okay, so now we're going to take a breath and you are going to receive my little commercial or public service announcement about data. Now, I understand that you may feel that data doesn't need a commercial. It's already overhyped. We hear about and talk about data all the time, right? We hear about evidence-based practices and data-driven solutions and key performance indicators. But in all the hype around data, I think we often lose sight of what its core importance is. So that's why I offer you this little public service announcement for data. So data is important because of how our perception works. What we perceive is based not just on what we actually observe out in the world, what we might call data, but also what we expect to observe. So this is how it works. The brain evaluates which of a variety of probable events are actually occurring out there in the world. And what we perceive is based in part on what decision the brain makes. Sure, what we perceive is also based on the incoming signals from the outside world, again, what we might call data. But there are far more signals coming from within the brain that affect our perception. So a great example of this is a YouTube video that went viral several years ago. I'm not going to show it to you because I bet a lot of you have seen it, but I will describe it. So it's about a 2-minute video. And if you're like me, you saw it as part of a presentation, and the presenter got out there and said, I'm about to show you this video. You're going to see a bunch of people passing a basketball between them. And your job is to count how many times the basketball gets passed. So if you're like me, you dutifully watched the video and counted the passes. And then the presenter comes back and says, raise your hand if you saw a guy in a gorilla suit run through the frame. And if you're like me, you did not see the guy in the gorilla suit. Then the presenter shows the video again, and sure enough, it's not hard to see. There's a guy in a gorilla suit moving right through the people passing the basketball. And it really shows you that you don't see things when you don't expect to see them. When I wasn't primed to see them, I didn't see it. But when I was primed to see it, I did. So these inner brain signals or expectations can really distort our understanding of a situation. Thus, those incoming signals or data are quite important to confirming or negating our expectations. But the trick is you have to pay attention to data to make that happen. Progress in organizations, and indeed in all of human history, often starts with the concession that our expectations might be wrong and that data might have something to teach us. So of course, the scientific method, which you probably learned back in 7th grade, primes us to focus on data rather than expectations. We must formulate a hypothesis and then use data from the outside world to see if that hypothesis holds up. Okay, commercial over. I hope I've convinced you. Okay, so now here's my little disclaimer about data. Data is part of the answer, but not the whole answer. Perhaps love is the whole answer, but indeed data is more about questions than it is about answers. It can show you what questions you should be asking and help you to refine those questions. It can point you in the general right direction, but you're never going to have perfect and comprehensive data, and data will never take you all the way to your answer. So we should be wary, but not fearful of data. And we should also ask certain questions about the quality of our data. Where does the data come from? Is the source likely to be biased? Is it drawn from a sample? And if so, is the sample representative of the larger group that we want to understand? What is missing in the data? Are there certain groups not represented? Are there certain time periods not represented? And why is the data missing? Are some survey respondents, for example, hard to reach, or do they lack trust in the data collector? Okay, so now let's talk about your second secret weapon or superpower, and that's your visual superpowers. And we're going to test it by looking at these two images that you see on the screen, and I'm going to ask you, which do you comprehend first, the Mona Lisa or the spreadsheet? Okay, do not put your answer in chat, because I'm going to just take a wild guess that you can understand the Mona Lisa more quickly. And that's because our visual system has evolved over millions of years to process images essentially in parallel. So what do I mean by that? Processing in parallel. It means that we don't read the Mona Lisa from top to bottom and from left to right. We take it in all together and understand almost instantly that this is a picture of a woman in front of a landscape sporting a dark dress and an inscrutable smile. Words and numbers, which only appeared within the last few thousand years, require us to scan individual characters, recognize them, piece them together into words or values, and then sentences or equations. And while all types of sensory signals barrage the brain all the time, the brain is specially geared for visual signals and uses half of its volume for visual analysis. That's because for a long time during human history, survival really depended on our ability to process visual cues like color, shape, and size at lightning speed. So think about detecting a predator hiding in the grass at a distance. We really needed to be able to process visual cues very quickly. So when we use such visual cues like length, color, and size, we transfer much of the work that is needed to decode data from the slower, conscious, energy-intensive parts of the brain to the faster parts of the brain that require less energy and result in more efficient cognition. Data visualizations such as charts, graphs, and maps use these visual cues to communicate data and thus greatly speeds up our processing of data, and so addresses in part the time crunch. Data viz is also a quick way to assess how dirty, disconnected, or irrelevant our data is. If the picture doesn't look right or complete, then maybe we need to do something to improve the data. Okay, so now let's test our visual processing superpowers. Okay, so I would like you to quickly try to answer the 3 questions that you see on the screen. Again, just answer them in your own head, no need to put them in chat. Using the data in the very simple spreadsheet that you're looking at. So, you know, which were consistently higher, corporate or foundation grants, or what were the trends for each? I'm only going to give you 3 more seconds because when I show you the exact same data in this simple graph, it's so much easier to answer those questions. We can see that corporate grants were consistently higher over time than foundation grants, that foundation grants remained relatively flat over time with one exception. There was a sharp increase in May. And that corporate grants exhibited a cyclical pattern, sort of an up, up, down pattern that repeated itself on a quarterly basis, always reaching the peak in the last month of the quarter and then declining dramatically in the first month of the next quarter. That pattern would be really, really hard to see in a spreadsheet. Okay, so not only is data displayed visually easier to process, it actually appears to have more impact. So a June 2018 Washington Post article describes a series of experiments in which data displayed in charts significantly reduced the misperceptions of subjects, both liberal and conservative, on important political issues. So the chart you're looking at shows the results of just one of those experiments. There was a whole series, but in this one experiment, Republican respondents were asked whether they believed that average global temperatures were increasing, decreasing, or staying the same over the past 30 years. So the respondents were divided into 3 groups. First, there was a control group. They're represented by the orange bars on this chart. And they received no information at all. They were just asked that question about what's been going on with global temperatures over the past 30 years. Another group represented by the gray bars, before they were asked the question, they were given a textual summary of the scientific consensus on global temperatures. And then they were asked what they think is happening with global temperatures. And then a third group represented by that blue bar got a chart showing temperature change since 1940 as measured by 4 climate institutions. And as you can see, the people who saw the chart, again, those people represented in the blue bar, were the least likely to draw the wrong conclusion. And strangely enough, that textual summary actually exacerbated the perception problem for Republicans who strongly identified with the GOP. They got the exact same results when they presented various political issues to people who identified as Democratic in the US system. Again, their perception was greatly corrected by charts rather than a textual summary or no information. Okay, so you have these so-called secret weapons. What are they good for? Let's consider what your greatest fundraising challenges are, and then we'll consider how to address those challenges with data viz. Okay, so we're going to look at 4 particular challenges today: showing the need for your services to current and prospective donors and funders, showing the impact of what you do, distinguishing your services from other organizations, and evaluating your progress over time and showing that progress to current and prospective donors and funders. Okay, so this is really the heart of the presentation: how to use data viz to conquer the challenges that you have. One way organizations use data is to make the case for the need for their services. Here's a great example of using data viz for that purpose. This example actually comes from over 200 years ago. So in the 1800s, Florence Nightingale and statistician William Farr analyzed army mortality rates during the Crimean War in England. And they discovered that most of the soldiers hadn't died in combat, but rather from preventable diseases caused by bad hygiene. Nightingale decided to make her case with pictures rather than tables of numbers or prose. In her words, to affect through the eyes what we failed to convey to the public through their word-proof ears. So her invention was the polar area chart, kind of a variant of the pie chart, as you can see on your screen. Each slice of the pie showed deaths for 1 month of the war, growing larger if deaths increased. And as you can see, each pie slice is color-coded to show the cause of death. So the blue portions were the proportion due to preventable deaths. The red portion were due to wounds, and black were due to other causes. The Queen and Parliament could see really at a glance the importance of hygiene, and they quickly set up a sanitary commission to improve conditions, and indeed death rates fell. So Florence Nightingale became one of the first people to successfully use data visualization for persuasion to influence public policy. So you might want to consider channeling your inner Florence Nightingale and think about how to present your need in a visual form like she did. Here's another way to show your need. This shows the prevalence of a problem using icons. It also uses color, and it may make more intuitive sense than a bar chart because we're seeing actual icons that represent individuals. This is not the kind of visualization you would want to overuse, but it could really pack a punch depending on what kind of data you are visualizing and really help to make the data seem less abstract, really emphasize that you're talking about real people. A quadrants chart shows the relationship between two key measures and can be another great way to show exactly where the need is. So I created this chart for a client who was working with a number of school districts to implement what they call deeper learning strategies. The first thing they did was survey principals and teachers at the schools involved in the project and ask them a number of questions to ascertain how important each of the deeper learning strategies were to them and how often they already put these strategies into practice. This chart shows that the overall results for all principals and teachers who completed the survey. And each dot represents one of the deeper learning strategies. Each dot is positioned to show the average importance assigned to the strategy and the average frequency of practice of that strategy. And as you can see, and the consultants could see at a glance, that although teachers and principals already felt the strategies were quite important, they were putting them into practice less than 50% of the time, with the exception of direct instruction. So they could see that the need was really in addressing the obstacles that were preventing the educators from doing what they already believed was really important. Okay, here's a fun way to communicate need. The type of data that viewers are most interested in is usually data about themselves. So this is a strategy for putting, quote, the viewer in the viz. So this is just a silly example, and I actually have never presented this to an audience that included a lot of people from Canada, but it just asks a silly question. What % of accidents in Canada involve a moose? And then it's an interactive visualization where the viewer can enter in what they think the answer is. And then what happens is the viewer can scroll over those words in the lower right-hand corner and see what the data actually show, which is about 3% of accidents involve moose, and that they can see how their guess compared to what others guessed and what the actual data showed. So it's a great way to sort of engage viewers in what otherwise might be pretty dry statistics on need. Efficacy. So how do we show efficacy with visualization? Nothing's more effective than a bar chart, really. It may seem tired, but we all know how to read them. So the cognitive load is really low, and we can see right away, that this organization started meeting and exceeding their goals starting in March. Another way to show efficacy, which makes an even stronger point, is one that allows for a comparison of the trajectory of one group that got an intervention to another that didn't. So a chart like this is a great way to show efficacy. This Viz uses a number of techniques. The chart is called a stacked area chart, but when you place several small charts next to each other, that's called small multiples. So this is a small multiples presentation of stacked bar charts. It also uses 100 people rather than percentages. Humans aren't so great at percentages. They can think of a group of 100 people much more easily. The notations are helpful too here. We can quickly see that poverty and child mortality have decreased dramatically, and that basic education, literacy, democracy, and vaccination have all dramatically increased over the past 200 years. Uniqueness. Sometimes we want to show that our organizations are unique. This is a chart not about organizations, but about advanced placement test takers. And this chart shows a comparison of female and male students on what advanced placement tests they take. It effectively shows where there's similarity and where there's difference between the two groups. So if you read it from sort of the bottom to the top, you could see there were similar numbers of male and female test takers for Latin and statistics, but really female test takers dominated certain tests like drawing, design, and foreign language. This is called a tree map, another great way to show uniqueness. This particular one compares one organization to others using shape and color to show the number of clients served. And so we can quickly see that the organization called Youth Together served more clients than all the other organizations combined. Okay, evaluation and planning. Logic models, which you're probably familiar with, get a lot of play in proposals in my experience, but then they also sort of collect dust after you get funded. So a logic model is really just a flow chart showing how a program is designed to work, what are the inputs and outputs and outcomes, and how that process is supposed to play out. But I wondered what would happen if we plugged a logic model into real-time data. So I came up with something called a living logic model. Again, it's plugged into real-time data. It shows progress to date using color, and it's interactive. So when you click on any measure in the flowchart at the top, you get more data, disaggregated data about, in this case, about individual students in the tutoring program below. You can also scroll over components in the logic model to learn about different aspects of the program. This information can include images and web links. So it really creates a very useful tool for organizations to both monitor their own progress and to show their progress to current and prospective donors. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about how to turn a good visualization into a great one. So this is sort of my checklist of, or my 10 data viz suggestments. They're not commandments because there's always a good use case for breaking any individual one. But in general, if you follow these, you'll turn good visualizations into great ones. Okay, the first is to clean your data. We talked more about dirty data at the beginning of the presentation, and this may seem obvious, but take a look at your data first before you visualize it. Look for missing data, duplicated data, formatting issues, such as with the dates, and clean it up before visualizing it. Everything rides on the quality of your data, so don't skip this step. Number 2 is to encode thoughtfully. So what do I mean by encode? Researchers have studied what types of encodings people are able to decode most accurately and rank them in the following list. So rather than, again, showing data in words and numbers, you can use color, size, shape, position to communicate data, but which do we understand most accurately? And as you can see on this chart, position along a common scale allows us to make pretty accurate comparisons among groups. But then when we go towards the other end of the spectrum, things like curvature and shading and color saturation, we can only make general comparisons. So I can, say for almost certain that one line is about twice as long as another line, but I'm much harder pressed to say that this shade of green is twice as dark as that shade of green. So pies are delicious, but they're often inscrutable when it comes to applying them to data. So look at this image. We can confidently proclaim that the E bar is the tallest, but we would be hard pressed to pick out which pie slice is the largest. But indeed, the pie chart is showing the exact same data as the bar chart. And that's because we don't do so well with angles. So when comparing the quantities of several things, bar charts are almost always better than pie charts. The only exception is that when you want to compare a part to a whole, so really if you want to sort of compare one slice to the rest of the pie, then pie charts can be pretty effective. But once you get beyond 2 or maybe 3 slices, you really should skip the pie chart and use a bar chart or some other type of chart. Okay, highlight what's important. Once you visualize the data, the story can still be hidden, particularly those unfamiliar with the data. And that's when it's time to call out certain data points using color and annotations. Here is some Center for Disease Control in the US data on chronic illness, which shows an example of highlighting what's important in a visualization. This type of chart is called a parallel coordinates graph. It shows the level and amount of something across several dimensions. In this case, we're looking at the percent of adults with chronic illnesses across US states. Each line represents a state, each one of those gray lines. But I've changed the color of one line, the line representing Hawaii, so you can compare Hawaii to the rest of the states. And I've also used notation to really draw your attention in particular to how Hawaii compares to the rest of the states on depression. You can see it's the lowest state in terms of rates of depression, and Oregon is the highest state. Okay, suggestment number 4 is to show order. So ordered data should be shown in a way that our perceptual system intrinsically senses as ordered. And conversely, unordered data should not be shown in a way that perceptually implies an ordering that does not exist. So here's a screenshot of a interactive data dashboard I created showing health center data. The bar charts at the top show the exact same data as the bar charts at the bottom. It's showing the percent of health visits that included depression screening across different care teams in family medicine, pediatrics, and women's health. The only difference between the charts on top and charts on bottom is the ones on bottom are ordered in descending order, making it really much easier to pick out which teams are meeting the goal and which are falling far short of the goal. Suggestment number 5 is to clarify rather than confuse with color. So don't use the same color hue for 2 different variables. Don't use the same color saturation for different magnitudes of the same variable. Don't use too many color encodings on one dashboard. Bright, fully saturated color is kind of like yelling, and you don't want to yell all the time. People will think you're crazy and stop listening to you. So what you should do is moderate color as you might moderate your voice. Only yell when you have a really important point, and then provide all the other information in softer, less saturated colors to provide contrast. So let's see this at work, or actually in this case, not at work. This is probably like the worst data dashboard ever created. It breaks almost all the rules I just gave you. It uses the same color to represent different things in adjacent charts. It's got too many colors going on. All the colors are bright, fully saturated colors. It really gives you a headache just to look at it. Another thing we need to take in consideration when visualizing data is color blindness. So actually 7 to 10% of men are red-green colorblind. Just fun fact, it's a much lower prevalence in women because it's on the X chromosome, and the chances of having it on both X chromosomes for women is very low. But the chart you're seeing, or the color array you're seeing on the right, is what the color array in the left would look like to someone with red-green color blindness. So if both those arrays look the same to you, you have red-green color blindness. So what this means for data visualization, of course, is that we should not put red and green next to each other, because people won't be able to distinguish the difference if they have this type of color blindness. Okay, here are some maps showing that CDC chronic illness survey data that I also showed you before. And it uses something called a diverging color palette to emphasize contrast. So where you see the states colored in blue, those are states with high ranks on 2 health indexes. So it's showing where there's healthier adults. And the orange states show where there's less healthy adults. So the light blue and light orange are, states that are in between, but light orange is towards more unhealthy and light blue is towards more healthy, and gray is right in the middle. So it makes it much easier to sort of pick out corridors of good health and poor health, for example, in the Southeast. Suggestment number 6, if you've read anything by Edward Tufte, he's sort of the grandfather of modern data visualization. You know about the data to ink ratio, which should be as close to 1 as possible, according to Tufte, and I agree with this. So we don't really think in terms of ink anymore, so you can think about it as the data to pixel ratio. But the idea is to make a visualization look as clean as possible, and to allow the viewer to focus attention on key data points and eliminate any distracting visual elements. So here again is 2 line graphs. They both show the exact same data. But I have removed the grid lines, data labels, and color legend on the one on the bottom, and just directly labeled the lines. So as you can see, there are fewer distractions and allow the viewer to just compare the trends of the 2 groups more easily on the chart on the bottom. Suggestion number 7 is no unjustified 3D. This one comes from Tamara Munzer, the University of British Columbia. We've all seen those kind of cool looking 3-dimensional looking charts that you can get on Excel, for example. But in order to make those charts look 2-dimensional, the programs have to distort the images and end up misrepresenting the data. So one technique that's needed is called foreshortening. That's a technique in which you reduce or distort in order to convey the illusion of 3-dimensional space. So parts of the image that are supposed to be perceived as closer in space are made larger. So if we're looking at the red slice of the pie here, is made larger to look like it's closer to us in space. And then the parts that are supposed to be perceived as farther away are made smaller. But as you can see, the angles represented on the 2D chart on the left are distorted on the 3D chart on the right. Those 2 charts show the exact same data, but that red slice looks much bigger in the 3-dimensional one. Also, to create the illusion of 3 dimensions, another technique is to obscure some objects with others to make it appear that one object's in front of another. But of course, this is a problem for accurate assessment and data visualization. in the chart on the top, the green bars are barely visible. So rather than have a third axis, you can just use colors they're already using in these charts to encode that third variable, making it much easier to distinguish in the 2D chart on the bottom. Okay. Eyes beat memory. This also comes from Tamara Munzer, and it just means that it's easier to compare two charts by placing them side by side than having to hold one in memory and while you're looking at another one. Here's a great example of the power of eyes beat memory. Again, this is a small multiples chart. And as you can see, there are small charts that are laid out together to make it easy to scan across charts. You can quickly scan to see the differences between different crimes. So this is a great small multiples chart by Doug McCune. I have his blog at the bottom here. You should check it out. He's a great data visualizer. But basically, these are just bar charts. The yellow bars show daytime crimes, and the blue bars on the bottom show nighttime crimes. And then just each bar chart represents a different type of crime. So we can quickly see that driving under the influence and drunkenness occur more often during the night, and that suicide and trespassing occur more often during the day. Okay, zoom in, suggestment number 9. When showing a series of visualizations, start with the most general view, sort of the 30,000 foot view, and then zoom in. So here's an image of a series of visualizations, 2 of which you've already seen using that CDC chronic illness data. The maps give you a general sense of where there are health concerns according to the data set, such as that corridor of poor health in the Southeast. So that's what I presented first. Then there was the parallel coordinates graph, which helps to compare states and specific illnesses and conditions. And then there was a third interactive dashboard, which I haven't shown you, which allows the viewer to dig in even deeper into trends and possible predictors of good and poor health. And finally, Viz is not always better. Okay, so when is a table better than a chart? One case is when you have an already really engaged but diverse audience. So these folks are highly motivated to access certain data and won't be annoyed by having to find the data that they want on the table. But they also have diverse interests, so that you want to pack a lot of different data into one place. And tables use paper or screen real estate really efficiently. You can fit a lot of rows and columns in a small space, allowing users with different interests to find data in a single table. You may also want to use a table when you have many units of measurement. So for example, you want to show the height, weight, location, and satisfaction level of participants in a healthy eating program. This data involves 4 different units of measure: inches, pounds, latitude and longitude, and survey ratings. So such complexity is really difficult to represent in a single visualization, and you might want to go with a table instead. Okay, we're getting there. I know we're almost out of time. Let me just quickly talk about some resources that you might want to check out. Again, you don't need to write any of this down because you're going to get the slides as well as a handout. But this is a great online catalog of different data visualization applications that you might want to try. Here's a list of free data visualization applications and programs. The one I use the most is Tableau Public. So happy to answer questions about that at the end if people have questions. Also, how do you choose the right chart for the data you have on hand? There's a lot of sort of chart chooser flow charts and interactive tools online. This is perhaps the simplest and really kind of my favorite. It's called Chart Suggestions, a thought starter. You can find it online, and of course you're going to get it in the slides. It's based on Gene Zelazny's classic work called Saying It with Charts. And it's really just a decision tree where you start in the middle with that basic question: what do you want to show? And then it provides 4 answers. You want to show a comparison, a distribution, a composition or relationship between two things. And then you answer that question, and then it leads you through a series of other questions. And then you arrive at a simple kind of chart that probably most people could read. So I would really highly suggest that you try that one out. But there are other ones out there. Also, this is a great tool. It's called the Data Visualization Catalog, which you can also find online, which just simply tells you about different types of charts and what they're good for. Here are some folks that you may want to follow and read on a regular basis. I've already mentioned Edward Tufte, but these are all kind of like big name data viz gurus. You might particularly be interested in Anne Emery and John Schwabish, because they tend to visualize data that's more similar to what nonprofits would deal with. These are just a list of services that I provide through DataViz for nonprofits. I'm happy to have a free consultation with you. You can get on my calendar by just going to my website if you have some questions about what to do with your data. First consultation is always free, but if you're interested in building something like a living logic model or some interactive data dashboards and don't want to learn a DataViz program yourself, please let me know. I also have a blog called 60-Second Data Tips. If you sign up for it from my website, and I believe that Toby and Sam are going to share the link for it, you can sign up, just add in your email address, and I'll send you a 60-second data tip each week. They really only take 60 seconds to read, and you can sort of gradually increase your data prowess over time. Okay, discussion, we're at questions. I went a little bit over, but not too far over. Sam, do we have some questions?
We have one question. So it's on data storage. How can a small nonprofit go about storing their data? I'm assuming they're talking about privacy and security.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on various database options, but I do, different clients have gone through the painful process of transitioning from one database to another, or transitioning from, Excel spreadsheets to a database. And I know that the basic trade-off is if you get one of sort of the off-the-shelf databases like Salesforce, the great thing about it is that they've already worked out a lot of issues ahead of time for you. And of course, you'll have their customer service if you run into troubles. But the downside that everyone I know who uses Salesforce or something like it find is that, it's hard to customize for your particular needs. So you need to really weigh, sort of the customer service versus customizability. If you really need something that's custom, then you're going to need to hire someone to create it for you if you don't have that skill set in-house. I would also highly recommend, when looking at various databases, to look at their data visualization capacities. Again, Tableau is the data visualization tool that I use the most, and it can connect to live data in a large number of different kinds of databases. You can use the free version of Tableau with Excel and Google Sheets. So maybe if you're planning to be visualizing this data, look to see what capacities are already included with the database. Like Salesforce has its own DataViz application tool that comes with the database, but it's pretty limited. So I would suggest that you highly investigate that. I'm sorry, that's not a real direct answer, because the question's a little bit outside of my expertise, because I don't have a broad range of experience with different types of databases, but there are a lot out there.
Definitely, and we appreciate any information that you can give us. Our next question is from Susie. When does a small nonprofit know it should develop and utilize dashboards? What are those decision factors? Oh,
that's a good question. I don't think there's any organization that could not benefit from an interactive dashboard. And I mean, I guess if you have something like 10 clients, you know what's going on with all 10 of them all the time. So then maybe you don't need to be looking at your data that way. But I think there's a way in which data visualizations in the form, for instance, of data dashboards helps us understand what's going on in a way that our brains don't allow for. So you might, already know that in general, you're showing an increase in something, an increase in employment among participants in your employment program. But it's harder to see how subgroups are doing if you don't visualize that data. So maybe you're not doing so, maybe the women in your program aren't doing as well, or maybe people from a certain zip code area aren't doing as well. So that's the type of thing that you can see much more easily and see changes over time more easily if you visualize your data, for example, in a data dashboard. Again, as I mentioned before, the data is more about helping you ask more specific questions. It's not going to answer all of your questions, but if you can see that, like we're doing really well, but we're not doing so well with people in the zip code. Okay, well, why aren't we doing so well with people in the zip code? And, you can draw on your own experience or maybe additional data to answer that question.
Perfect. And I think that is something that can be applied in every single industry, because I know that I have a spreadsheet PTSD. So this has been definitely helpful for me. I've got a comment just from Pepito saying, I've been using Power BI for data visualization. I'm sure that there are many tools out there, but do you have any recommendations on, say, some of your favorite or the best tools?
I'm a Tableau person. I mean, I've heard good things about Power BI, that's Microsoft. But I'm not an expert in Power BI. I've seen things created with it and they look really nice, but I haven't created things with it myself. I've seen comparison, if you Google, you can, ask them to compare to different types of applications and you can kind of see the pros and cons of each. But I do think Tableau is really an amazing tool. So I would recommend Tableau. The cool thing a lot of my clients use is the free version of Tableau, which is called Tableau Public. It includes a lot of the same features as the paid version. The big difference is that you have to save what you create to the Tableau Public server rather than to your desktop or your own server. So if you're dealing with sensitive data, you don't want to do that. But a lot of my clients are dealing with de-identified data. So there's no names or, telephone numbers, social security numbers, and those kinds of things in the data that they give me. And then I visualize it using Tableau Public. So they get this really sophisticated interactive data dashboard, but they don't have to pay anything for the software itself. And we can refresh the data over time. It could be actually connected to live data as well. So, so you might want to, if you're looking to just try out a new tool, try out Tableau Public. There's lots of tutorials online. See if you like it. And if you really like it and you need to use it with more sensitive data, or you need it to be connected to a data source that Tableau Public won't connect to, then you can look into buying, subscribing to it. And you can totally use the visualizations that you create with Tableau Public. You can use them when you subscribe as well. So you won't have lost anything by just trying out Tableau for free.
Well, thank you so much. I think that we are going to wrap things up a little bit.